Art has had some place in the lives of humans for centuries, allowing us to express ourselves through creative mediums and make some sort of tangible object that we have a connection to. There are thousands of kinds of art and thousands of different styles within those specific types of art, but this video will be exploring the Fauvist modern art movement. Fauvism was a short-lived yet fascinating style of painting that lasted from 1899 to about 1908. It was the first avant-garde art movement of the 20th century, and shifted further from the older, traditional methods of perception and away from Impressionism as well. Fauvism was different from other art movements because it had no specific agenda. There was no manifesto motivating the art, and no agreed set of required aesthetics. The goal of Fauvism was to separate color from its descriptive or representative purpose, and to make it an independent element within a painting. Fauvist art consists of a relatively balanced composition, which is achieved through simplified forms and saturated colors that draw attention to the flat surface of the canvas or paper. This creates a strong and unified immediate visual impression for the viewer. Individual expression was also an essential part of Fauvism, in the way of the artist's direct experience with the subject of the painting. Their emotional response to nature and personal intuition were more important than academic theory or subject matter. The most obvious thing that sets Fauvism apart from other art movements is that the colors used in a Fauvist painting are often not realistic to the subject, but illustrate the way in which the artist sees the subject with their own emotions. One example of this is Portrait of Henri Matisse by André Derain. The entire painting is very brightly colored, and the brushstrokes are clearly visible and mostly unblended. Complementary colors such as red and green are placed next to each other to appear even more vibrant. This element is actually used quite a lot in this painting, especially concentrated around the eyes, with the blue surrounding orange, and purple placed right next to yellow on the nose. Another common Fauvist technique is a dark color used to outline the subject, to separate it from the background. This is shown on the right shoulder, where concentrated blue is separated from green by a thin black line. Although detail is not typically an important aspect of Fauvist art, this painting in particular defies the traditional idea that detail must be precise and controlled. Instead, specific facial features are represented by differences in color and the style of the brushstrokes. These areas of color that are created also add a defined sense of structure in the painting, which is another unique characteristic of Fauvism. The colors used are not true to the natural world, but show that realistic color is not necessary to create structure in a painting. The emotion in the painting is yet another important component of Fauvism. There is an intense concentration of color in and around the eyes, which look out at the viewer thoughtfully yet impassively. The combination of colors in the entire painting create an underlying sense of discomfort, but also inspire curiosity as to what specific emotion the artist was trying to convey when he painted this piece. The first key artist of Fauvism was Henri-Émile Benoit Matisse. He was born on December 31st, 1869, in a small industrial town in northern France. As a young man, he worked as a legal clerk and studied for a law degree, and once he had a position in a law office, he began taking drawing lessons before work in the morning. In 1890, he began to paint while recovering from an illness, and shortly after, he started to pursue art as a career. In 1891, Matisse moved to Paris for artistic training, where he was taught with the traditional academic method, which required working from line models and copying the art of the old masters, such as Leonardo da Vinci, Michelangelo, and Raphael. However, Matisse was also exposed to the post-impressionist work of Paul Cézanne and Vincent van Gogh while living in Paris. He began showing his work in the mid-1890s, but only started to paint more percussive works in about 1901. He was influenced by the pointillist style of Georges Seurat and Paul Signac, who painted with small dots of color rather than full brushstrokes. In 1904, a visit to southern France in Saint-Tropez inspired him to paint bright and sunny pieces, such as Lux, Calme et Volupte, which translates to luxury, serenity, and pleasure. Another trip to the Mediterranean village of Collioure, where he worked together with André Derain, inspired his major pieces Open Window and Woman with a Hat, which he showed in the 1905 Salon d'Automne exhibition in Paris. It was this fateful exhibition that led the critic Louis Vaucel to say, Donatello parmi les fauves, or Donatello among the wild beasts. This famous quote gave a name to Fauvism, and Matisse quickly became known as the leader of the Fauves. He continued to paint works in this style, such as Bonheur de vivre, or The Joy of Life, but also experimented with Cubism in works like Piano Lesson, despite Pablo Picasso's reputation as his lifelong rival. Although Fauvism takes such a radical approach to color and form, Matisse's subjects were usually very traditional. His own studio, as seen in L'Altar Rouge, or The Red Studio, portraits, and arrangements of figures in rooms or landscapes. He continued to paint in the Fauvist style until his death at the age of 84 in the town of Nice in 1954. Another key Fauvist artist was André Derain. He was born June 10, 1880, in Château, in northern central France. He first began to study art at 15 years old on his own, and in 1898, when studying to be an engineer, he took painting classes under Eugene Carrère, a French symbolist artist. It was there that he met Matisse and Maurice de Vlaminck, another main Fauvist painter. From 1901 through 1904, he was required to serve the military in Commercy, so did not paint during that time. After he was released, Matisse convinced his parents to let him drop engineering and focus solely on painting. Derain then went to study at the Académie Julian, an art school in Paris. During the summer of 1905, he worked with Matisse on paintings, which were displayed at the Salon d'Automne at the end of the year, which is now known as the debut of Fauvism. In 1907, the art dealer Daniel Henry Kahnweiler purchased Derain's entire studio, which gave him financial stability to continue painting. Derain then continued to Montmartre to be closer to his friend Pablo Picasso and other artists. Around this time, he began to shift his paintings to more muted colors, which shows the influence of Cubism and Paul Cézanne. Around 1912, the color in his paintings reduced much more, and his forms became austere and severe, which was inspired by the work of the old masters. In 1914, he was mobilized for the military and released in 1919, so that was another 5 years where he wasn't able to paint. However, the 1920s were the height of his success, and he became so popular that during the Nazi occupation of Paris, he was invited to Berlin in 1941. His presence there was used as Nazi propaganda to show that even modern and progressive artists agreed with the Nazi regime. However, after the liberation, this led to him being ostracized by many of his former supporters. This led to a complete decline in his popularity, and he lived a fairly obscure existence until he died in 1954 after being hit by a car at the age of 74. Fauvism is pretty recognizable as far as art movements go, with bright, unnatural colors and obvious brushstrokes. Fauvist paintings are painted with no attempt to create dimension. In fact, the goal is to emphasize the flat surface of the canvas or paper. The brushwork is bold and harsh, with little or no attempt to conceal individual strokes and blend color. Fauvism focuses on the individuality of the painter, and likewise, the individuality of each unique brushstroke. Dark or black outlines are also common to separate objects from the background in a landscape or portrait. The most important method used in Fauvism is the emphasis on the emotional quality of color. The colors used in the painting matter more than the subject or what the subject looks like in reality. Complementary or warm and cold colors are also used to add excitement to the piece. Limited detail is also a big part of Fauvism because the focus is on the emotion, not the subject. There's no specific event or chain of events that resulted in Fauvism. Many of the key Fauvist artists were inspired by the post-impressionist works of artists such as Paul Cézanne and Vincent van Gogh, and even the impressionist works of Claude Monet. The non-naturalist color schemes found in Monet's works directly contributed to the Fauvist ideals concerning use of color. Various post-impressionist styles also inspired Fauvists to reject the traditional three-dimensional space used in paintings and seek a new space in paintings that was defined by the movement of color planes. Fauvist artists were also influenced by Neo-Impressionism, but found it too restrained and replaced Neo-Impressionist techniques with wide, freely applied brushstrokes and simple or abstract compositions. Fauvism is still a very interesting art movement today, and the legacy of Fauvism was an explosion of other modern art movements that moved away from traditional painting techniques and became more unique and abstract as time went on. Fauvism completely changed the public opinion of color in painting because it challenged viewers to look past the outward appearance of the work and instead think about it from an emotion-based perspective. At the time, people were outraged that the Fauvists had the gall to paint such uncivilized and unrestrained pieces, especially at the 1905 Salon d'Automne exhibition. In her book The Fauves, by Natalia Brodskaya, she states that Fauvism immediately demanded attention, and that, despite its stormy reaction, the hostile voices which continued to make themselves heard were not enough to hinder the Fauves from competing freely with other trends. These hostile voices believed that the loud, garish paintings were just a ploy to make the biggest uproar. However, as we now know, the reason for all that color was just to portray emotion, which is one of the most universal goals in all art forms.